Hey everybody, and welcome to the Atypical Life YouTube channel. I am here today with the wonderful Andrew Cartmel.
Thank you. Wonderful, Josh.
Thank you so much. This is the final showrunner for the Doctor Who Classic series, so oversaw the Sylvester McCoy era. I just wanted to talk a bit today about the Andrew Cartmel master plan and how that era was sort of shaped since you came on board, if that's all right with you.
Great.
Absolutely. So I'd love to know first and foremost, what led to you becoming involved in Doctor Who? Because I imagine you had quite a career before that as well. Is that right?
My agent was a friend, who's a guy called Richard Wakely, who was old friends with John and Nathan Turner.
Right.
So when John, who was the producer of Doctor Who, and John suddenly found himself in the position of needing a script editor because Eric Sayward quit, my predecessor. So there was, he needed, and actually that wasn't a problem because the show was on hold, it was on hiatus. Then John suddenly got word that he was going into production very quickly, so he needed a script editor quickly. So he asked Richard if he knew anyone. Richard recommended me. That's how it came about.
Wow. And when you got there, of course, you had a new doctor to deal with. You had Sylvester coming on board.
No, there was nobody there. We had a vacancy in that position, and Sylvester was not. We didn't even have anybody in mind at that point. But John knew he had to cast somebody, and we looked at a load of people, of whom Sylvester was easily the best. He was John's favorite and my favorite, and we got him. Thank heavens.
Absolutely, because I believe he was doing mainly stage before that, wasn't he? He was a bit of a comedy troupe sort of actor, wasn't he?
He came from the Ken Campbell Roadshow, which was a very interesting, inventive, wild and crazy troupe. I wouldn't say just comedy. They were just avant-garde theatre. And I believe that Sylvester was working in the box office and that they enlisted him as part of the stage act. Sylvester McCoy, the human bomb, as he was originally known. His name really isn't Sylvester McCoy, but that was, he kept it from the Ken Campbell Roadshow days. That's
incredible. But yes, coming in from 1987, I guess you could say from then on there was a tonal switch that slowly went on with the show from that year into season 25, into 26. Was that talked about with you and John, if you don't mind me asking? Was that something that you desperately wanted?
It really originated just with me and the writers, because I felt that the show had got a bit too camp, frivolous, and chiefly the big issue was that the Doctor had become too weak, too passive, and really over-explained. So I needed to make him more fearsome and mysterious. It was pretty obvious that this was the way to go, because I didn't like what had been done, and it wasn't proving particularly popular. And there were plenty of honourable antecedents. I think that Hartnell was quite a creepy Doctor. I think that Patrick Troughton, although he was playful, could always be, if not scary, then certainly impressive and alien. So that all these things were really lacking in the current characterizations of the Doctor. So I just began to introduce them, working with a brilliant team of writers, and thankfully with Sylvester, who was a marvelous choice to be cast as the Doctor.
Oh, absolutely. I only asked this because obviously in Sylvester's first season, you can still see these quite, how to say, more comedic, I'd say, than later on.
We were all finding our way. I didn't have, when I started, I didn't have any firm views on what the Doctor should be like. It was only as we went along that it became clear that he needed to reset. And so when we started, with a story called Time in the Rani, which I disowned, because as a new script editor, I wasn't given the power to fire the writers, which was the necessary thing to do. So the scripts were, some people love the scripts, in which case I'm delighted, but I take no credit. But I also refuse to take any responsibility for them being disastrous. Right. So the first story was a write-off. Sylvester was trying to find his feet, and as you say, he had a great comic gift. So he leaned into his comic abilities, which he would continue to do in Paradise Towers, for instance, and Dalton the Bannermen. But that began to wind back a bit towards the end of the season with Dragonfire, which was one of the best written of the series. And also it had the great advantage that we had a new companion, because as good as Bonnie was, she was definitely a camp comedy companion.
Yes.
Whereas Ace could have darker tones, was more realistic, and was an action heroine. So with that addition, the new companion allows it for the Doctor to change as well.
Oh, 100%. I was going to say, in my own humble opinion, that catalyst is Ace. And recently I have spoken to Sophie Aldred, and she really credits that when she came on, she was giving great creative direction. That was her word. And I just wanted to throw that in there to say I spoke to Sophie Aldred, I guess. But yeah, that direction really does take off from Dragonfire onwards. I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I think Sophie was exactly what we needed. She did a wonderful job, and Sylvan and Sophie had a wonderful chemistry. They're even born on the same day, not the same year, but they have the same birthday. They share the birthday. So I always thought of that as being sort of symbolic of how perfectly complementary they were to each other.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. And I'd always love to talk about how it progresses later on as you come into that 25th season. And you come in with why am I
Remembrance of the Daleks.
Yes, Remembrance of the Daleks. One of possibly the greatest Dalek story of that sort of time frame.
It's not only the greatest Dalek story, it's still considered one of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time, which it is. Oh, yeah. I was extraordinarily lucky that another script editor, who was then a producer, Caroline Olton, passed on a sample of Ben's writing to me, and I knew that he was the best Doctor Who writer I'd run across, the most natural. He was, and just the best television writer that I've ever come across. So it was wonderful to meet him, and suddenly I had this. It was like I'd sort of been on my own in the office. I'd been working with writers, all of whom were talented, but none of whom were natural Doctor Who writers. Suddenly I had this guy who was absolutely my right-hand man. So that changed everything.
No, absolutely. Again, it comes across so obviously that he knows the show in every line of that script.
Well, he knows science fiction, he knows writing, and once he got on board, he really steeped himself in Doctor Who and watched everything he could get his hands on, which was not everything, because as you know, a lot of the shows were missing, but John Nathan Turner had a fairly good library of what was still in existence, and Ben went through borrowing just about everything, I think.
Wow, that's amazing. I must ask Ben very quickly, if you don't mind, would there have been plans to bring Ben back for any further scripts had the show gone on past 1989?
Well, as you know, he did also do Battlefield, so he did do two stories for us.
Yes, that's right.
And as to whether we would have used him again, the answer is absolutely yes. If we'd been continuing to go forward. In an ideal world, what I would like to have had happen would be for John to move on and make me producer, and for me to make Ben script editor. That would have been a cool thing to do. Yeah. We're just talking about alternate universe stuff now, really, because that's not the way things played out.
No, of course. I'd love to speak about that sort of period in a moment, but I really have to give credit about that, and then we move on to sort of the Nemesis, and then that final season, which is, in my humble opinion, one of the best. I really like how thematically it plays on this Doctor becoming more manipulative and all this sort of stuff. I'd love to hear how that was planned out, because it seems, new set of writers that I've read you were quite instrumental on bringing on, obviously, this new core of people.
I was completely responsible for bringing on the new writers, but John, the producer, excuse me, was completely responsible for giving me the freedom to do that. So more, full credit to him.
Of course, yes. And as you go on, you get more abstract stuff like Ghostlight and...
Now, I mentioned earlier that Ben was the perfect Doctor Who writer, closely followed by Mark Platt, because Mark had a deep, deep love of the show and knowledge of the show, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool fan and an admirer of the show, none of which are usually qualifications for being a good Doctor Who writer, because usually that level of love and knowledge handicaps people. It limits their ability to see things objectively. But in the case of Mark, it went hand in hand with a brilliant and really distinctive, unusual kind of style. He's very much his own writer, absolutely terrific writer, and quirky too.
Oh.
And so I've often compared him to Robert Holmes, because he has that kind of Lewis Carroll eccentricity combined with the ability to tell a compelling narrative. So again, he's one of the best fitted writers to do a Doctor Who. He did come in after, but well, actually, those guys arrived about at the same time, because I remember we soon had them both sitting in the office together. Those were superb days when we had this team of writers. We'd have Ian Briggs, Stephen Wyatt coming in, Graham Curry, and they were a crack team. And then later Rona Munro, all of whom contributed really memorable, really distinctive classic stories to the show.
100%. I think it speaks volumes that a lot of them went on to do the book range later on as well, in the Virgin Adventures books. A lot of them had quite a hand in them later on. And Mark also did quite a few like spin-off stories in the 90s. So
Mark has been the backbone of Big Finish for decades. I don't know what I would have done without him. And he writes great stuff, like his two-part Cyberman story, Spare Parts, is a classic, which was traduced and really, you know, the TV version of that was really in many ways a diabolical misrepresentation of a brilliant original.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that, because I think a lot from this time, and I get once again speaking in Big Finish and stuff, but also from this late period of the show, I think a lot of that does echo into the modern series. I'd love to speak a bit about that.
We set the template for Russell's when he brought the show back. If you look at Survival in particular, that was the template for New Who. Full power to the brilliance of Rona Munro, because she could weave a fantasy, science fiction, horror story with urban reality and combine the two with brilliant writing, which is revelatory of character, and also very funny and very poetic. She's an extraordinary writer. I'm really glad they hired her, that Stephen Moffat had the nous to bring her back.
Yeah, no, completely. And once again, that story's so pivotal to me, because I hope you don't mind me saying, when I was a lot younger, a lot of the VHSs I had, all of Classic Who is very big and feels like sets and walking down signs. But seeing something like Survival made me go, this is the same show, because it's so close to that early Russell T Davies sort of charm, if you see what I'm saying. I really appreciate that. But yes, we get, obviously later on in that era, I have to ask you, because I asked Sophie as well, how was it in that later stage? You know, did you know going into that season that there was going to be a cancellation? Did you?
We had no clue. We had no clue until we had shot everything and we were editing Survival. And at a certain point, John asked me to write this coda, because it was the last. It was going to be the last story, the last episode, the last story going out, and he knew that there was going to be at least a pause. You see, you have to remember that Doctor Who was hated when we were working by the BBC, by the hierarchy of the BBC, the powers that be. They hated the show and they wanted to kill it, and they finally got their way. But we, you know, they were always trying to kill the show off. But we didn't know they were going to succeed. And I think probably the first inkling I had was when John asked me to write this sort of eulogy for that final episode, which I did with his permission.
Really well done. And
Thank you. It's very kind.
I read a bit of trivia that was actually filmed on November 23rd, so it was actually filmed on Doctor Who's birthday, which is quite nice. It's quite cool.
Well, you have to remember that the scene that you see on the screen was shot, and then the voiceover, I believe, was recorded later. I mean, I'm willing to be corrected on that. So there'd be two dates that sequence would have been fashioned on two different dates, I believe.
That does ring a bell. But so if that's the case, I must ask, was there any tentative plans for the next season, season 27, that would be?
It already, Josh, when you're making a TV show like this, you have to begin planning the next season before you finish the one that you're doing. So we had plans afoot. There were writers that I was interested in using, like Tony Etchells, Robin Mukherjee, and Ben and I had begun to spin out ideas for a new companion, but these were all minimal. There was nothing set in stone, and there's nothing in much detail.
Of course. So going into that sort of time since, I'm always very interested, but obviously almost straight away, Virgin Publishing got in touch with a lot of the former writers and said, we're going to make our own original stories. I'd love to know how involved you were, if at all, with the Virgin New Adventures when they were coming out.
Well, they they approached me with the deal, and I was never interested in doing novelizations, where you take a script of a show that's been made and then you turn that into a novel. But the three things about this were that they were going to be original novels, that they were going to be longer than the novelizations, so you could do more, and that they were going to be more adult, there'd be more artistic freedom. Those are all appealing. What was not appealing was the money they're offering, so I turned them down. My agent turned them down on my instructions, and then they came back with an improved offer, which all the writers benefited from, which was nice. So I felt I'd struck a blow for writers while merely trying to strike a blow for myself. Well, not even striking a blow, I was just turning it down because it wasn't worth the deal. So we then, that was how the Virgin Adventures began for me. They were later things where they'd get all the writers together and they'd have meetings and they would sort of encourage us. And at one point, they made a number of wrong decisions about Virgin New Adventures. One was that they initially thought that they would put out the books in groups of 3 and link the books with some kind of narrative arc. Well, this was foolish, because the thinking was that then somebody would buy all 3 books, but Doctor Who fans going to buy all 3 books anyway. All this did was begin to inhibit the writer's creativity, because you start out wanting to do a standalone novel, even though it is a Doctor Who novel, you have a certain amount of creative freedom, but then you learn that you have to do it as a linkage with 2 other books. And then even your title, people come up to me and say, I wrote a book called Cat's Cradle. I never did. I wrote a book called Warhead, which was later cumbersomely retitled Cat's Cradle Warhead to fit with 2 other Cat's Cradle books in a stupid trilogy, which never existed in my sense. That was one big mistake that they did at Virgin. And to their credit, they rapidly stopped doing that, although not rapidly enough not to deface my novel. And the other thing that they did was they decided they wanted to get for similar kind of thinking, they wanted to get a bunch of regular reoccurring companions that you would lumber the writers with. And I wanted very little to do with those. Virgin circulated a questionnaire saying, what can we do to improve these characters? And I wrote, kill them, 2 words.
Yeah.
And I meant to just get rid of them. And I was forced to occasionally mention them in my books, but I tried to do it as little as possible. Again, I think that was just a bum idea. And it comes from a really kind of obvious line of thinking about what makes people come back to stuff. It's like the sort of thinking where British B movies used to cast a broken down American actor and the thinking that this would make them more commercial. Similarly, they thought this would make the Doctor Who books more commercial. I don't think it did. I think it just made them less good.
I think there's definitely a line of thinking there, because even now, if you talk about them, 50% of people online love them, and 50% of people online really don't. And I think there's an acrid thing going on there. But I have to ask your opinion on one thing, because I asked a lot of Who writers this sort of opinion. Obviously, towards the end of that run, there was a book called Lung Barrow, which tended to try and reveal a little bit about the Doctor's past.
Well, that Mark Platt and I were going to do a TV story called Lung Barrow, and we worked on it for quite a long time, but it was it wasn't really a TV story. It lacked that kind of surface drama that you need for television. It was much more like a kind of Mervyn Peake Gormenghast kind of tale. So it was much more naturally a novel. But I'm familiar with that story because Mark worked out the initial details with me, and it was giving this wonderful, again, kind of Gormenghastian, Mervyn Peake style kind of backstory to the Doctor. And I was in the business of giving the Doctor a mysterious past. And this was sort of a method of doing that. But it ended up being in a novel, one of the most sought after and rare Doctor Who novels. And a guy knew that a chap on social media discovered that I didn't have a copy, and he bought me a copy, which was incredibly kind, or he sent me a spare copy that he had. So I've now own this book. But I've been in the position of helping Mark dream up some of and helping Mark get on television and being sort of there as a kind of godfather to the Lung Barrow story, and I didn't have a copy of the book, which had irked me, and now I've got a copy of the book. But I love Mark Platt's writing, and I think he's a great Doctor Who writer. And you say that 50% of people online like the Virgin books and 50% don't. Well, 50% of people online hate everything. 50%.
Yeah, exactly.
There's always this division, and I don't think that's I think there were some really interesting and good
Mhm.
novels written uh, for the New Adventures. I wouldn't necessarily put my own in that. I
Mm.
feel they were compromise creation, but a lot of people do like my trilogy,
Mm.
including Russell Davis was always has said very kind things about it. So I'm glad that people do like it. I just felt that I was straitjacketed because I didn't really want to write
Yeah.
Doctor Who novels. I wanted to write my own novels.
Of course, 100%. And with the advent of Longbow, I'd also love to say, did that match up to your idea of what the Doctor was, or did you not really? I know you wanted to make him more mysterious, but that idea of him in Longbarrow, did that match up with what you thought?
Well, Mark and I agreed on what we were trying to do, and Mark went ahead to do it in his own distinctive, crazy,
Yeah.
brilliant kind of. He's got this wonderful sort of Victorian sensibility in many ways,
Mm,
and so he took his own unique approach to it, which I'm perfectly cool with.
of
The
course.
main thing, the crucial thing to me about the Doctor is you mustn't over-explain him, and I think you just have to reach a point where you say we don't know who he is or where he came from. I was just pushing it back so that
Yeah.
we could say that, and dismantling, or rather reworking, the Gallifreyan mythos with the help of people like Ben and Mark
Mm.
to just give us the kind of launch pad for a new and more mysterious Doctor. I know that Chibnall's been doing his own weird thing with it.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about that, but this might be my final talking point here. I'd love to know what you think of the recent revelations to do with Gallifrey, to do with the Doctor's story.
I don't know anything about them except what I've glimpsed on social media, but he's
Right.
fallen into a basic trap because he seems to be saying, aha, the Doctor was none of the things that you thought, which is what I was doing. But
Mm.
then he says, but instead he is this. Whereas I wanted to say, instead he is, we don't know, because that was where
Mm.
Doctor Who came from. That's where the title came from. We were not supposed to know
The
his
mystery.
origin. And if Chris has nailed down any specifics, then all he's done is created the same problem in a different guise, because you don't want to know too much about the Doctor. And if you've given an alternative explanation, that's as bad as the original explanation, because I just wanted him to be more than a Time Lord
Mm.
and leave it at the specifics of that. If Chris has over explained it, then he's completely it's a complete waste, because you're back
Mm.
to square one. But I haven't seen the stories. I don't intend to see the stories, not because I don't like Doctor Who, but because I'm not working on it anymore, so it would be a little frustrating for me. And also, I don't really watch television much at
Mm.
all. I watch a lot of classic movies, but I'm very busy, so my time is
So,
limited. And watching TV drama, I mean, I don't even watch my favorite American shows, and I do think American television is the best. I really just don't watch telly. I did watch Fleabag, which I loved, and I've got Killing Eve waiting to be watched. But that's going to be about it for me for British television for the foreseeable future. And I'm afraid Doctor Who isn't on the list. Uh,
mm,
it wouldn't be on my list anyway, because it's not really my cup of tea unless I'm working on it. And as I say, I if I felt that the guys who had the show were doing a great job, I'd
mm,
think that was good, but it would be kind of heartbreaking because I wouldn't be invited to the party. And if they're doing a terrible job, I just get angry and I don't have time, to waste on those, getting angry about something that I have no control over.
no, of course, completely. I must say, I don't, you don't have to particularly comment on this, but Russell coming back, of course, is a wonderful thing considering the love that he's shown to
I
your.
think Russell is a much more natural showrunner than Chris Chibnall. Chris Chibnall, I have to quickly say that I think he is brilliant at crime drama. I
Mm,
found Broadchurch addictively watchable. I really liked the stuff that he did on Law and Order UK. I don't think he can do science fiction, so I don't. I thought his Torchwood stuff was dreadful, and I think that he has no feel for science fiction, so he's not a good guy. I know he loves Doctor Who, but I don't think
mm,
he has the aptitude to do a Doctor Who, so he was never a good choice for showrunner, in my humble view. Whereas Russell, the thing about Russell, what Russell has, besides also a deep love of Doctor Who, is that he writes really well about characters. And
yes.
Russell is not good at plotting, but he's brilliant at characterization, which is why he was such a demon writer for soaps, because that's what
Yeah.
you have there. But I've often said that the ideal Doctor Who writer is basically a blend of Stephen Moffat and Russell. because Russell has this beautiful feel for character, and Stephen, when he's disciplined, is a brilliant plotter. So somewhere the ideal Doctor Who showrunner to me would be a two-headed monster consisting of Stephen and Russell T Davies.
If someone confused them, that would, yeah.
There's a certain yin yang thing going on there, and they would complement each other's strengths and negate each other's weaknesses, I feel. But having Russell back sounds like a good idea to me.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. On that note, I would love to give you the opportunity to promote anything that you've got coming up, if you want to direct our viewers to any of your other work.
Well, thank you. I will. I write a series of crime novels called the Vinyl Detectives novels. The sixth, there are 5 of these. Please get one from your library. Check it out. If you'd like it, buy some, or buy some for your friends. The 6th novel, which is called, Andrew's mind goes completely blank, because I'm working on the 7th novel, which is called Noise Floor, and I'm looking at the 5th novel, which is called Low Action, but the 6th novel is called Attack and Decay, and that's due out in May, but also in May next year. Starting on May the 2nd, May the 3rd, I have a play running for a week in Barnes, Southwest London, at the old sorting office. And the play is called Glacier Lake, and it's a thriller. And so it's on for 7 performances only. So please look up the old sorting office in Barnes, Southwest London, and look up the play, and please come along. And with everything you've mentioned, I will do my best to get some links in the description below. That would be very helpful, Josh. Thank you very much. No problem at all. So everyone watching, go to the play, buy the book. All right. Please do. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming on. As I say, I think we can both appreciate the busy life. Before you go, one more thing. I've currently been doing a radio program where I play music. Starting in the new year, it's going to be rebranded as Vinyl Detective Radio. So if you're interested in listening to some the kind of music that I deem suitable, then check me out online as Vinyl Detective Radio. That's amazing. Oh my goodness, that's so cool. But yes, absolutely, guys. Look in the description below. Feel free to subscribe. Do you have any social media at all that you wish to speak of, Andrew? Well, I'm present on Facebook and Twitter, and indeed on Instagram. I'm easily identified because I'm the guy with a cat at his shoulder. There are various Cartmels. Don't be fooled by cheap imitations. That would be me and my cat Molly. Look for the sign of the cat, folks. The cat beside Andrew's face, and then you'll know it's the right Andrew Cartmel. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's absolutely the best way, via Twitter or Facebook, or indeed Instagram. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you all for watching, guys. I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.